Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the May 21st, 2013 business meeting of the Washington County Board of Education. We have a quorum of members present, so we will call the meeting to order. I'd like to first introduce Ryan Holthouse and Lauren Holthouse, who are here to help us do the Pledge of Allegiance, lead the Pledge of Allegiance. If you'll come to the microphone.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. No, don't go away. There you go, kids. All right, so if you would like to introduce any guests you brought with you today.
I brought my mom and my dad and my principal, Mr. Talmago.
Okay, where are mom and dad? Raise your hands. Thank you, mom and dad, for bringing your children out. And why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? What do you like to do in school? What do you like to do out of school?
In school, my favorite subject is math and reading, and I really like to do sports and a lot of crafts.
Crafts. My daughter likes crafts too. And how about you, Ryan?
He can go to.
My favorite subject is reading and math. I like to play lots of sports and go in the art and the library when at school.
All right.
Do you guys
Good
have
for
another
you.
brother here? Or
Yep.
Right over there.
would you introduce your other brother?
He's going to come
And who's that?
That's my brother, Jacob Holthouse.
Hey, Jacob.
All right, Jacob.
Thank you.
Well, thank you to the two of you thank you to both of you for starting our meeting.
You're welcome.
Thank you to Mr. Telmaco for picking these two students to come and start our meeting, and to mom and dad, thank you. It's I think it's a great thing to have students lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance when we start a meeting.
Thank you.
So,
Thank you all.
thank you all. Have a great evening.
You too.
Are there any other guests that need to be introduced this evening?
Just our
Our
student rep.
our student rep-elect is here. Anybody else?
Amanda, would you remind us of...
Yes, Jessen Grunendijk. I said it right? Awesome. All right, Jessen Grunendijk. Good luck with all that next year, guys. Is from Barbara Ingram, and he will be taking my position at the end of June. Well, beginning of July.
Where are you going?
I'm going to Gettysburg College.
Good.
Good for you.
Congratulations.
Congratulations. Any other guests to be introduced? Okay. Next is the approval of the agenda. Is there a motion to approve the agenda as presented?
So moved.
Thank you, Mrs. Brightman. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mrs. Fisher. Is there any discussion or amendments? Seeing none, the question's on the approval of the agenda. All those in favor? Any opposed? The motion carries 7-0, and the student member concurs. Next is the approval of minutes.
Mr. President, move for the adoption of minutes from a closed session on Tuesday, May the 7th, and the minutes from our business meeting held on the same date.
Thank you, Mr. Bailey. Is there a second?
Second, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Ridenhour. Is there any comments, corrections, amendments?
Yes, I have a
Mrs. Williams?
correction. On page 90, about 3/4 of the way down, where it says Paramount, she commented that she would like Paramount. That should be Pangborn. Would you
So
like me to make a...
is that your motion to amend?
Yes, I would like to move that the correction be made to the sentence. She commented that she would like Paramount to have the science lab, and that changed to Pangborn.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mrs. Brightman. Is there any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, the question is on the amendment offered by Mrs. Williams. All those in favor? Are there any opposed? The amendment passes 7-0, and the student member concurs. So we return to the question of the original motion on approval of the minutes. Are there any other amendments, comments, or discussion? Seeing none, the question's on the approval of the minutes. All those in favor? Are there any opposed? The motion passes 7-0, and the student member concurs. Next on the agenda is public comment. There are no members of the public who have signed up to speak. Is there anybody in attendance at the meeting who wishes to speak? Please. Now come on up to the microphone. Our process allows for 5 minutes for members of the public to speak. Mr. Bailey's our timekeeper.
There we go.
He'll let me know as we get to 5 minutes.
It'll be very short. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I did sign up
If you
on
could
the
just let us know
online.
your name and
Yes, Tim Harris is my name. I'm
Thank
a
you, Tim.
resident of Hagerstown with students at South High School as well as Barbara Ingram School for High Schools, as well as middle school, E. Russell Hicks, and elementary school. It's come to my attention at South High School that the restrooms are in disrepair. And I don't know if any of the board have seen some of these, especially I haven't been into the women's restroom, but those that have come out have informed me that the doors are missing on the stalls in the women's restrooms. And as this is an area where teams from other counties come to see Hagerstown, some of the first impressions from these parents and students as to the state of Hagerstown, it just doesn't represent our school and our town very well. So I wanted to bring that to the attention of the board. Thank you.
Yes, one question.
Sure.
Are these restrooms in the building, or are they in the stadium?
In the stadium area,
The school
yes.
stadium area?
The school stadium area. Yeah, in the school, I imagine I don't know what the condition of the restrooms are there, but as these restrooms in the stadium represents
Agreed.
our community and school, it's,
We'll have some folks look at them tomorrow.
thank you.
Thank you for bringing it to our attention. Thank you. And if you could just stop and see Richard Wright in the corner on your way out this evening, I would appreciate it. Just so we know how to get back in touch with you, that's all. Is there any other members of any other members who wish to speak? Any other people in the audience? No? Okay, next is board member response to public comment. Mrs. Brightman?
Just a comment, the speaker mentioned that he had signed up online. Is there a reason why, and I'm just curious what the process is so that information does make it to the board? And so I just put that out so that our public will know how that works.
On the school board page, there is a mechanism for which people can sign up to speak without having to do it when they arrive here. At the time of the meeting, I did not have anybody signed up electronically, but it is a mechanism we know that's working because people are using it relative, and I'll check in with
Check
Jen.
with him
Just check
when
with-
he signed, that would be great.
Okay, thanks.
Perfect, thank you.
Are there any other comments? Okay, next on the agenda is old business, consideration of the second reading of policy JFCA, the student dress code.
Is it not working? Do you want to use mine? I've got my paper.
Good evening, Dr. Harding's Board of Education members and Dr. Wilcox. On April 2nd, 2013, the Board of Education approved the first reading of the proposed changes to policy JCFA. At the time, the Board of Education recommended that the first two paragraphs on policy JCFA be retained and that a new sentence be added to the policy that authorizes the superintendent in consultation with student representatives to adopt administrative regulations to carry out the spirit of the policy. The board then proceeded to rescind the remaining sections of this policy. Since the first reading, the proposed changes have been posted on the Board of Education's webpage, and members of the community have been invited to provide comments. Thus far, only one comment has been received. That comment was considered by members of the Policy Committee. I am requesting the Board of Education's approval of the second reading of the proposed changes to Policy JFCA. And Amanda, I don't know if you have anything.
I just
that
want
you'd
to
like
say that I think with the weather getting,
Switch your microphone on.
I think it's working.
Yeah, I know what it is.
With the weather getting warmer, that it's really important that we get this passed now, because for the past couple of months this hasn't been as much of an issue because people aren't trying to stay cool, so they're wearing more. Now we need to sort of regulate how much students are wearing or not wearing. So I think it's very important that we get this passed now so that it can be in effect towards the end when it's really getting warm.
Thank you. Is there a motion to approve the second read of policy JFCA, student dress code?
Mr. President, I move for approval or for the adoption of policy JFCA entitled Student Dress Code.
Thank you, Mrs. Fisher. Is there a second?
Second, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Ridenhour. Is there any discussion? Ms. Fisher?
Based on what Amanda just said, I just want to point out that the changes that occurred to this prior to the after the first reading, removing many of the specifics, which Dr. Wilcox will be putting into a regulation, that even though this gets adopted tonight, I don't know that the regulations are formal yet, which actually spell everything out, because I know on the policy committee we asked to have a discussion with Mr. Wilcox, Dr. Wilcox, about those regulations.
Which is scheduled this week, and I have a final set of regulations which I'll bring to you.
So the regulations will not be out quite as quickly as the policy.
Right, but it'll happen soon. Right.
Very soon.
Mrs. Williams?
So my question then is, will it go into effect immediately or at the start of the 2013-2014 school year?
My expectation would be that as soon as the regulations are issued, it's in effect.
It's in
but
effect.
That's
Okay.
maybe, is that your
Yes.
understanding, Dr. Wilcox?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
And it will be reflected in the student handbook for next year as well, so that we can communicate it adequately to
So
the
it'll
public.
be in the handbook for the new school year. What
Yes.
kind of notification will students and staff have?
I believe we'll probably have to lean on Richard Wright to get a
To
good
put that-
communication plan out,
An alert now call, maybe?
possibly.
Well, and every year, every school is supposed to go over the handbooks with the students. Whether the students retain that information and whether that actually happens, I don't know, but they are supposed to.
Well, and I think really the question that we have really becomes like what happens in early June up to graduation. And that we can speak to our principals about how they enforce the dress code based on the new rules. We don't really have to go through a whole series of gyrations to inform every student now, but we certainly don't have to send somebody home for the balance of the year given the new regulations.
Mr. Bailey?
Mr. President, I'm going to extract one sentence from the policy that I think is critical and should be the guide for all students and administrators. I'm going to read the one sentence. Students have the responsibility to choose their attire and to arrange their personal appearance in a manner that is safe, healthy, not offensive, and conducive to the educational process. If you can live by that, that's the key to the whole policy, in my estimation. And I hope everyone follows that closely.
Thank you, Mr. Bailey. Is there any other comments or discussion, amendments? Seeing none, the question is on Mrs. Fisher's motion to approve the second read of policy JFCA. All those in favor? Are there any opposed? The motion passes 7-0, and the student member concurs.
Thank you.
Thank you, Amanda.
Congratulations.
Ms. Crable. We've had some additional guests come into the room since we started the meeting and had the public comment period. I'd like to entertain a motion to add a public comment period as the next item on the agenda.
So moved.
Thank you, Mrs. Fisher. Is there a second?
I second that.
Thank you, Mrs. Williams. Is there any discussion? I just think when members of the public come, we should do the best we can to make sure that they get the opportunity to speak. And since we've already approved the agenda, we have to move to amend it. If there's no more discussion, all those in favor? Are there any opposed? The motion passes 7-0, and the student member concurs. So, are there any other members of the audience who'd like the opportunity to speak at public comment? Don't be shy. So we allow roughly 5 minutes for public comment. There are 4 of you, so that doesn't mean you get 20, but we'll consider it appropriately. And if you would just please introduce yourselves before you start speaking. We look forward to hearing from you.
I'm Hazel Wexler. I'm an 8th grader at Boonesboro Middle School, and we are members of the environmental club there, and we meet each week after school on Wednesday to recycle and confer on green ideas for ourselves and our families. We also help the custodians to recycle and try to make sure people know what they can put in the recycling bins and get them to put as much as they can in there rather than in the trash.
I am Mackenzie Drummond, a 7th grader at Boonesboro Middle, and we teach others in our school to reduce, reuse, and recycle. This year we joined the country effort to recycle sneakers. Then we collected egg cartons, eyeglasses, old cell phones, rechargeable batteries, and ink cartridges. We took boxes of the recyclables to the Boonesboro Green Fest.
Hi, I'm Alex Lettingham, and at the Green Fest we volunteered in the Kids Zone. There we helped the younger children make crafts. Our crafts were designed to use materials that cannot be recycled. Instead, we turn them into art. We also write and perform our own original puppet plays for the children. Our plays, of course, have an ecology theme.
Hi, my name is Kiara Blair, and I'm a 6th grader at BMS. And the 6th grade has just completed the second year of tree planting in Shaver Park in Boonesboro. We have planted over 240 trees in 2 years. It is part of our Governor O'Malley stream restoration project. The club continues to go to the park and water the trees every month.
We appreciate your support of after-school clubs like ours. It is important for us to take the ideas we have learned in science class and connect them to the real world. We look forward to new projects in the future. Thanks for your support.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much. Appreciate it. If there are comments, questions?
Thank you. A question to your students, Mrs. Blair. At the end of the year, the lockers often don't get cleaned out, maybe do get cleaned out, but there may be a lot of extra notebooks and things left over. Has your club looked at a way of maybe recycling or redistributing that type of material? It's already done. Perfect. Thank you. And I also understand that you do some water testing, stream testing there in Boonesboro?
Yes.
And that's in our flash drive, our tree planting.
Perfect. Thank you.
Are there any other comments or from board members? I just want to thank you all for what you do to make Boonesboro and Washington County a more sustainable, prettier, greener place. Everybody has their role to play, and I think you're leading the way for a lot of our students and really for a lot of our adults too. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all. The next item on the agenda is a consent agenda for 3 bids. Mr. Michael.
Good evening, President Hardings and members of the board, Dr. Wilcox. On behalf of Lisa Freeman, who's at a conference this evening, I'm here to present 3 consent bids for your consideration. The first bid is bid 2013-41, kind of a timely bid here maybe with our young people here presenting about recycling. The board just put out a bid for refuge and recycling. The bid could have gone to 2 different companies. However, we are recommending that we award it to Waste Management Holding Incorporated. They were the low bid for both the refuge and recycling materials. We're very pleased with this bid. Came in well under what we anticipated, actually less than what we pay right now, and that's with about a 9% increase in estimated volume. So we're very pleased with this bid and would recommend bid 2013-41 to Waste Management in the amount of $259,146.72. And that's estimated on the pickups, weekly pickups that we estimate at this time. Our second bid for consideration, bid 2013-56, track replacement at Boonesboro High School. We're recommending award to American Tennis Court in the amount of $150,030. That also includes participation with open space money. We did bid this project with an alternate at the request of the school and the athletic department in particular to look at an 8-lane track instead of a 7-lane track, 42-inch. Unfortunately, in putting out that price, we were hoping it would come in far less. I think the estimate right now is about $168,000, almost doubles the cost of the project. So we're not in a position right now, from staff perspective, to be able to accommodate Boonesboro's request to move to an 8-lane track. We certainly wish that we were, but it's certainly well exceeded what we anticipated. What we heard back from the company, a lot of handwork. Because of the nature of the track already being constructed, it's not as if it's starting from scratch. They would have to do a lot of extra work, and that was part of the reason for the cost. Our third bid for consideration is an RFQ, request 2013-53. This is for design services for the Downsville Pike building, for interior design work that needs to be required to be completed. We're recommending King Asbury and Associates in the amount of $162,115. We do have an alternate price for a sprinkler system if the company determines that we need a sprinkler system in the building. They've obviously been charged with interior type parts of the building. Consider asbestos. Do we need a sprinkler? ADA compliance, layout of the building. They've also been charged to reuse the wall system. Various components of the building, maximize its efficiency as far as flow and workspace and things like that. So that's our request at this time for consideration of these 3 bids.
Thank you, Mr. Michael. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
I move to award the bid to the lowest cost, responsive, and responsible bidders for bid 2013-41 to Waste Management Holdings, Inc., 2013-56 to American Tennis Courts, and RFQ 2013-53 to King Ashbury and Associates.
Thank you, Mrs. Brightman. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mrs. Fisher. Discussion? Mr. Bailey?
Mr. Michael, we do not have any running tracks in the county with 8 lanes.
I'm not certain. I think North High might be 8 lanes. I'd have to defer to Rob.
It is.
I believe it's 8 lane? Yes. I think the smallest track we might have, I think Hancock has 6 lanes. I'm not positive of that. I don't know if Rob or anybody can.
But
Our track,
8 lanes opens up opportunities for bigger things, bigger meets.
Central bigger meets can run another heat. A lot of times right now with hurdles, I think they run every other lane because of the width of the lanes. One time, I think when I was back in my track days, I think there were 36-inch lanes, and we may have had 8-lane tracks at that point. With the base down, we changed the meters. I think that's how we got to a lot of 7-lane tracks when we moved to 42 inches.
The surface, you take everything away that's there now and put down a new foundation and put the new topping on that, or do you go over what's currently there?
I think we patch and repair any material that's not suitable, and then we resurface the entire product, so we use the base that already exists. Mark, I'm correct.
Mrs. Brighton?
A question about the recycling. Do you happen to know what the percentage of recycling to non-recyclable might be?
I don't know the exact percentage. I think we have it estimated in the pickup charge. We don't have a way of, a couple times we've tried to figure out, is there a way to weigh
Tracking.
this material, really track the material, more visible where we're seeing, obviously in our recyclable bins. I'm seeing bins used a lot more because, of course, with our commingle product, I think people are more likely to try to get their
That's what I was
paper and
gonna ask.
cardboard and aluminum can and bottle all in the same container rather than trying to separate it or separate it into 3 and 4 different containers. So I think since we've gone to commingle, I think we've seen an increase in our recycling, but the trucks don't have a mechanism to weigh that or for us to really provide you an accurate answer. I think based on what we're hearing back from custodians and people, a lot of people do a good job with it, not everybody.
Okay, thank you.
Are there other questions or comments? Mrs. Harshman?
I had a question about the design services for Downsville Pike. I was wondering if the movable walls were being included in that and they will be kept.
Our intent is to reuse as many movable walls as possible. Some of them may need to be patched. You can see where people had things hanging on the wall and kind of, I guess as they put their screw in, kind of pulled the metal together. So staff's indicated to me, almost kind of body putty those things, and we would paint some of that if necessary, whatever. But that's the intent. That's to help keep down costs over drywalling large areas of the building. So we plan to reutilize as much of the wall system that exists as possible. And that, again, is part of the charge of the architect, to be creative in how to use the ceiling system and how we reutilize the wall system as much as possible.
Okay, because I know that allows for a lot of flexibility in what we decide to do with different areas and so on. And so I'm glad to hear that we are going to hold on to those. Thank you.
Are there other questions or comments? I'd like to ask just a process question. When we get these bids and it says estimate bid total difference, is the estimate a figure that's in a budget somewhere?
We don't itemize it out in a budget. We're kind of in our long-range planning, try to think, all right, how many projects can we do, and we put a number to it. A lot of the projects are estimated, like some of the track work was estimated probably off of past track projects, not thinking things have changed very much. But a lot of it comes from our architects and engineers, and I think we talked about that at the last meeting. We've been over and under. I think it depends a lot on how stable the market is. But it's in, as Mark and Rob, as we work together with Dr. Wilcox to rough out what we can get done in the budget. So the over and unders, is it real money? It's kind of like that, I saved you a lot of money by getting this thing on sale type thing a little bit, if that helps you. I mean,
it sort of does. I'm just looking at, for example, the refuse and recycle, the estimate at $350,000. Is that, we have to budget for that somewhere.
Right.
And when the bid comes in only at $259,000, does that represent a real savings that makes $90,000 available to do something else?
And that money would show up in quarterly adjustments and things like that. That item actually has a line item. So I don't know if Chris actually included his $350,000 in the FY14 budget going forward, or whether we would kind of firm that number up, like carry a number and then do that through quarterly adjustments. But
Okay.
I think the 350 is actually in there as our estimate going forward.
The other half of sort of where I'm going is, if we're making this decision not to include the alternate for the track, I mean, that's really a 10, 12-year decision.
It is, 7 or 8.
It just seems unfortunate that we can't find a way to make something like that happen. And when I look at the same consent agenda and see a difference of $90,000 in one bid, $27,000 in another, and $24,000 in another, seems like the dollars are there to do the project. Am I thinking about this in the wrong? Now, I understand we may want to have a larger conversation about, do those extra dollars that are below the estimate, is that the best use of them? I get that, but it seems we ought to have that discussion, since there's an opportunity here to really think about what that athletic space at Boonesboro High School is going to look like for the next 12 or 15 years.
I think it would be at the board's discretion. I mean, through quarterly adjustments in future budgets, that's how that would get picked up. I think right now, as we look at what we have left in the current budget, which would be allocated out of these resources, Mark and I had this discussion earlier this week. He's down to his last, well, it sounds like a lot of money, last $460-some thousand with a lot of purchase orders you have to sign. But certainly through quarterly adjustments, fund balance, there would be other means for the board to consider the alternate.
But do
and
we
that
lose-
wouldn't.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
As long as we knew soon, that alternate decision wouldn't have to be made tonight, but it would have to be made very soon because we'll move quickly on this track project.
And we don't, I mean, we could approve the base contract today and then add the alternate later if we chose to. And I'm way ahead of any conversation that all of us have had. I'm just trying to understand what decisions we're making today that are final that can't be added to or adjusted down the road. So if we made the decision to award the contract today, it wouldn't add additional cost to go back later and say, okay, now we want to do the alternate too?
Normally, our prices are good for 30 to 90 days. I don't know what the nature of this bid was. What would have to happen in order to get this track completed before the opening of school, we would have to let the company know that they're also doing the alternate, because obviously the alternate needs to be done before the resurfacing of the track. What we could do by award tonight would be get in the company's queue of getting the work done and let them know that we would let them know shortly whether the alternate was going to be accepted. Or if we were directed to, look at ways of finding that money. We certainly could do that if you wanted to make a motion if the money could be allocated in some means that we'd move forward and not even wait till the next board meeting.
I'll just say for myself, I'd like to, I don't know if I want to give direction to do that because it's really your budget. It's your budget at this point. I'd just like to understand what the trade-offs are. Given the savings I see here, what are the trade-offs that we wouldn't be able to do if we decided to pick up that alternate, say, in 2 weeks or sometime within the window that we have it? And if staff comes back and says, we really can't do this, I certainly understand that. But
from the budget,
it just seems like there's enough funds right there for us to be able to move down that road.
Also, think about all the times we brought projects to you that we were over budget. And this is where that all kind of goes back and forth in Mr. Mills's budget and the money that he handles. So right now, we're anticipating some floor projects and some things like that we're writing the POs for, or will write the POs for. Those would be, we could identify from the staff level, just in Mark's budget, what the alternative would be doing the track versus, doing a variety of other projects. That's not something we're prepared to recommend.
No, I understand.
To do the track over doing those projects, but it's not to say it couldn't come from other sources.
Okay.
I'll defer to my boss on any other comments.
Well, I think, we had a conversation over the weekend via email. I'd like to have some time with the team to talk about what would be the trade-offs. I know there are a number of other projects that we couldn't fund, but I think I shared with you in the email that part of the larger master plan of facilities probably required us to have a longer conversation. So perhaps if the board would authorize the purchase of the expenditures requested, and give us the authority to pursue the alternate bid if we complete an analysis that says that this is the most prudent use of the funds, given the other options that we might have to forego. Clearly, I do know this, and Mr. Michaels has done a pretty exhaustive analysis of all of our facilities, particularly the athletic complexes on the schools. We don't want to approach this in a kind of a haphazard way. We want to be thoughtful about it. As you say, it's a 10 to 12-year decision, but I also know that the Boonesboro community is pursuing turfing their football field. Maybe by going to a 7-lane track, we preclude that. Maybe we get ahead of them. So if you'd let us talk a little bit more about it, we can come back to you.
That's exactly all I was hoping for, is to encourage staff to have the conversation. And if in 2 weeks you say, we just can't do this, I totally get that. And we can't just pick projects to move up and down. I understand that we have a process, and I don't want to get ahead of that.
But the bid as presented would get us in the queue, and I think that's an important thing. Otherwise, we may miss the fall.
Do you, excuse me, do you need direction on that, or is this conversation enough that?
I'd have to ask Mr. Michaels and Mr. Mills, is the company going to show up the day after we let this bid?
I think in order for them to move forward day one, they have to know if we're doing the alternates. We could be delaying our process by 2 weeks, pushing it back into the fall a little bit, but I think as long as we get lined up and tell them we're having this conversation, if there's a way for the board to allow us to consider, there's a couple other possibilities. We can talk to the company about potentially value engineering the bid. They bid the document that we put out, which allows a little extra, on the inside and the outside of the track. It's about a 30-foot wide span. It takes a little over 28 feet, I think roughly 28 feet to have the 42 lanes. Do we have to have a foot on the outside and a foot on the inside? Could we go with 6 inches and 6 inches? Staff's had a little bit of conversation on that, and we think we could do some value engineering, probably save, $25,000, $30,000, $40,000. We can't save enough to where we could get it back within our reach, but maybe between that process and a redeployment of some other funds from another source and or direction to forego some of the other projects that we had. If we could get direction tonight, if you can get there, go ahead. We probably could stay on schedule quicker.
To do that, we need to pull this out of the consent agenda, and so there'd be some parliamentary maneuvering we couldn't vote on.
I think we'd be approving this anyway. We would
Okay,
just have a
without
follow-on.
direction, could we do a separate motion?
We could have a
for-
follow-on
okay.
direction. Mrs. Harshman, I know had a question.
I just was wondering what the advantage of 8 lanes as opposed to 7 would be. I know you mentioned that sometimes there's something that they run every other lane, but you could still only use 4 lanes with 8 in order to get the every other, and you can do that with the 7. So what is the advantage to having the 8 lanes?
When they run the every other lane, it's because if they butted the hurdles right next to each other on a 7-lane track, they couldn't run the 8 lanes.
No, but I'm saying on the 7 lane, you would still have every other, correct? So you'd still have 4, 1 on each outside and 2 in the middle. Would you not still have 4 lanes?
The current design is for 7 42-inch lanes, and that's where the key is, the 42.
The 42, okay.
Because our hurdles are 39.5 inches wide. So for it to be every lane, it needs to be at least 42. The 8 lanes is so they can hold a regional meet at Boonesboro High School.
Right.
A regional meet, okay. So right now we only
Or a
have-
double duel, or is anything other than a traditional 2-team track meet.
Okay, have we been holding that anywhere in the area? Have we been holding those anywhere?
We've had those at, I think, South High and North High both.
And
Yes.
and we're precluded from even attempting to bid because we don't have the facility right now at Boonesboro, which is a different class than
Right.
North and South.
Okay, that's what I was wondering. Thank you.
Project Open Space sometimes gets involved in these projects. Are they available for?
They're supporting
They're
this
on
project.
here.
The majority of
They're
the
on
funding for the
35,000.
resurfacing the track is coming from open
I'm
space.
sorry, I
So,
read that and I forgot it. I'm sorry.
yeah, our commitment is only $15,000 or $16,000 of the initial project.
Yeah.
It's the alternate would be basically 100% of the board. And in our athletic master plan that Dr. Wilcox mentioned, Rob's worked on that, Mark's worked on that, Patrick Holden has worked on that. Very extensive document, which for the first time probably in as many years, and I was an athletic director 20-some years ago, that we did a comprehensive assessment of everything that we have in the system, every building, all of our facilities inside and out as far as athletics. In the ideal world, we'd love to have 8-lane tracks at every school.
Are there any other questions, comments, or discussion? Mrs. Williams?
Yes, I have a question about the RFQ 2013-53, the interior renovations. Looking at the bid, that is significantly lower than 3 of the other bidders, and I'm just wondering, has this firm done similar renovations that, we're confident that we're going to be able to have what it is that we need?
I think they
using this firm?
Yes, we have confidence in them. They're one of our on-call architect firms. I think after missing out on a number of other projects just by a few dollars, maybe they sharpened their pencil, wanted to kind of get back in on this project, but the scope of the work's been reviewed with the contractor, with the architect. Their engineers already picked out, which will have a significant portion of this with the electrical and the HVAC work that'll be completed. So we're confident that they can complete the project, or the design work for the project.
Is there any other questions or discussion? If not, the question is on Mrs. Brightman's motion to approve the consent agenda. All those in favor? Are there any opposed? The motion passes 7-0, and the student concurs. Is there a motion to provide direction to staff to consider what would be necessary to put the 8th lane into the track?
I
Or
will
phrase it in any way that you think appropriate. Sorry.
Thanks. A lot. Yes, Mr. President, I'd like to move to give direction to staff and the superintendent to explore the opportunity of adding an 8th lane to the track at Boonesboro High School. And I guess would they need to come back to us?
Bring a recommendation.
Yeah, make that recommendation.
Thank you, Mrs. Brightman.
Disjointed, sorry.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mrs. Harshman. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, the question's on Mrs. Brightman's motion. All those in favor? Are there any opposed? The motion passes 6-1, and the student member concurs with the majority.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next on the agenda is educational specifications for West City Elementary.
Superintendent Wilcox, Dr. Hartins, and members of the Board of Education. I'm joined today by Aaron House and Brent Fite of Bushy Fite Moore & Architects. We're here today to seek approval of the West City educational specifications. This is so we can submit this document to the Maryland State Department of Education for approval, and so we can stay on schedule to be eligible for state funding this coming fiscal year. Just a quick history of how we got to where we're at today. Back in October, we held a work session with the Board of Education where we heard comments that you asked for us to consider in the design of the new West City Elementary School. We took those comments to an educational specification committee for West City Elementary School, which was comprised of approximately 30 members, including administrators, principals, teachers, community members, facility and maintenance staff, and one Maryland State Department of Education professional. We held 4 meetings one meeting at Conacajig, one at Winter Street, one at Salem Avenue, and one at Malginsville Elementary School to discuss the creation of the draft educational specifications, where committee members had to look at the square footages that were prescribed in the budget that we set forth in the FY14 CIP. We had to make certain we stayed within the allocated square footage and, of course, the budget. And then we came up with what our best compromise was, again, considering all the factors that had been presented to the committee. In December, we brought an update to the Board of Education to go over where we stood with the educational specifications, and it was at that time we received direction to utilize the vision and expertise of a design professional to ensure that the educational specifications would be appropriate for all current design techniques, technology, and would ultimately result in a flexible and functional facility throughout its life cycle. And, of course, we had to do that within the budget, so, easy task. But, no, we took that information, and we first went and met with the Maryland State Department of Education to go over our current draft specifications to make sure we were in line with what the state was looking at. They gave us some comment and feedback. We took those, we utilized those draft educational specifications to solicit for a design professional for the West City educational specifications, as well as the design of the West City Elementary School. We incorporated that as part of the contract as a separate piece. Of course, the board had voted on, I believe it was back in March, and we awarded the contract to Bushy Fite Moore & Architects, who I'm now going to hand over the presentation to let them describe what they are recommending with the educational specifications.
Thank you, Chad, and good evening, Board.
First of all, we want to thank you for the opportunity of being able to review the ed spec prior to going into the design phase of the project. We found that the ed spec was very well written, comparing it to other specifications that we have utilized or programs we have utilized within our design field and other elementary schools. We found that the net square footage, space relationships were all in compliance and very much in keeping with current design processes and trends right now. We had made several recommendations to the Ed Spec Review Committee, which I think Aaron will be presenting here to you tonight.
Thank you and good evening. I'm going to go over some highlights of the recommendations that were suggested by Bushy Fight Morin. These will serve as some of the guiding design principles for this facility as we start to put the designs down on paper to develop the schematics as the next step in the design phase. First off, safety and security is to be given high priority with respect to the building design. The high level of security shall be seamless with the design of this facility, providing the necessary level without detracting from the overall appearance of the facility. Based on our discussions and input from Maryland State Department of Education, consideration shall be given as to designating a room in the vicinity of the administrative suite to double as a command center for use during emergency situations. This room should be fitted with infrastructure such as data, telephone, intercom, video, etc. The second item, the scale of the building and interior spaces shall be respectful of the ages of the students being served and promote environmentally friendly concepts. The appearance of the building should provide an aesthetic presence constructed with local or regional materials as applicable that are durable yet adaptable for the future educational environment. The lead specific and lead for the leadership in energy and environmental design, those specific building components should be highlighted and incorporated for use as a tool in the learning environment. The proper use of adequate daylight will be evaluated and incorporated into the various learning areas of the building. Through the use of clear story windows or other techniques, daylight will be introduced into the building common areas and corridors. This will help reduce energy costs while also allowing us to obtain the necessary LEED credits. Through the state requirements, this is a minimum of a LEED silver building. We're going to take a look at the utilization of visual cues in the central student and public receiving area that provides a clear visual means of wayfinding. It serves as a means to inform and provide direction to the students, staff, and public to the various areas or activities while limiting the use of directional signage. The Instructional Resource Center is to be designed as a feature of the building that can be readily accessible from the classroom areas. After-hours building access will also be addressed so that it does not permit unnecessary access to the building areas that are secured. Within the Instructional Resource Center, the design will consider alcoves or breakout areas for independent reading or studying, individual instruction, and specialized activities. These areas would be visible from the instructor or service desk at all times. As Chad mentioned earlier, the programmed building areas are within the state prescribed guidelines to maximize the state funding for the project. We reviewed the possibility of adjusting some of the net assignable square footage, but the feedback received from the review committee was they did not want to sacrifice classroom space, and we certainly understand that. So pending space and circulation efficiencies, the design team will consider available spaces to be assigned to common collaboration spaces, such as alcoves or group breakout areas, either adjacent to the classrooms or off the corridors or some area like that. These areas should be associated near the classroom areas and accessible from the corridors and utilized for activities such as small group learning, independent reading, specialist instruction, or student-led presentations. These collaboration spaces are to be visually accessible from the classroom for security and guidance. We are going to make an effort to locate specialty instructional areas where they are readily accessible to the classroom areas in order to provide efficient use of the instructor's time to access the student from the classroom area and escort them to the special instruction areas. We know that technology is moving at such a fast pace. We've discussed the future trends in educational technology with Jim Wright of Wright Engineering. Wright Engineering has consulted on many past projects with Washington County Public Schools and with BFM. Our goal is to provide a building with maximum flexibility and electrical and information technology and classroom design to permit the ease of adaptation of the instructional spaces over the 50-year lifespan of the building. We will look at how to provide adequate and accessible infrastructure to accommodate and adapt to varied teaching techniques, furnishings, room orientations, equipment, and other technology. One example of this is something as simple as providing enough power receptacles for charging of iPads, tablets, for other devices, but then also having the adaptability and the flexibility that in the future, if those receptacles need to be used for something else, that we can easily accommodate for that. So these are the highlights of the recommendations that we've made to the EdSpec Review Committee. We thank you for the opportunity to review and provide our input. We feel as though we have a very strong document here that will provide a first-class or world-class facility for a public that is deserving of that.
Aaron, thank you. One of the things I would like to point out, and this was just luck as it would be, one of the things we did with the committee, the Educational Specification Committee, was we toured Morgansville Elementary School because we felt it was important. After the committee saw the current Winter Street, Conococheague, and Salem Avenue space, we wanted them to see a new space, and we wanted to get them to get a feel of the size of classrooms because paper doesn't always give you a good, realistic grasp of what those sizes are. So we did tour that facility. We also went over the square footages in that facility, and as it would be, it was designed by Bushy Fight Moore Architects, so it worked out very well. But that was one of the things we tried to accomplish to make it a little easier for everyone to understand what exactly it was we were really talking about as we created these specifications. So I just thought I'd throw that little tidbit in there. With that, again, I'm just going to bring it up. We are seeking approval this evening for the educational specifications so we can submit them to the Maryland State Department of Education. And at this point in time, we'd be open to entertain any questions or comments.
Thank you, Mr. Criswell. Thank you, Mr. Fight. And thank you, Mr. House. Is there a motion to approve the educational specifications for West City Elementary School?
So moved, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Bailey. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Ridenhour. Discussion. Any questions or comments for the team? Mr. Bailey?
I read in the document that you were going to provide for quick and easy access during evacuation, when evacuation of the building was necessary. How do you accomplish that? I mean, I think it's an appropriate topic today with what happened, what was going on in Oklahoma City. How do you get them out faster, and how do you provide for that?
Go ahead, I'm going to the expert.
I think, number one, I think having identified egress routes, and that is a requirement of the building code, is number one, to have an adequate number of exits or egress, and number two is looking at the location of those with respect to the classrooms and the other spaces. So we take a look at the overall occupant load of the school and how that's distributed through the building, and we will locate egress routes throughout the building based on where the occupant load is, and assuming that the entire school is full of staff, students, and public.
I suspect part two of that then is training the youngsters to follow through drill how to get out of the building as quickly as possible.
I think unfortunately what happened in Oklahoma, I'm sure there's going to be lessons learned,
Yeah.
but I mean, something that devastating I don't know how you handle it. It's just almost the same as an explosion.
Yeah.
Yeah. But certainly, getting out into the corridor and having daylight out in there to be able to give you those visual cues that we talked about, to be able to see the exit, I think would certainly be helpful and expedite the egress process.
I think, Mr. Bailey, I would simply add that one of the things that we've talked about in all of our school constructions are lines of sight, the adequacy of the passageways, the hallways. Sometimes people look at a building and they say, well, you could save space by narrowing the hallways. Well, yes, you could save space and you could save money, but if the hallway isn't wide enough to accommodate the load of students based on the occupancy, then it could become a trap, if you will, for kids. So we're very thoughtful about that. But your point about drill is absolutely correct. Even the best designed facility, if the kids don't know how to use it and the teachers aren't familiar with the systems that you have in place for moving kids, are really, much ado about nothing. So we do drill. I think most of you have seen our drill reports where monthly we drill for fire. We move our kids in and out of the schools 8 or 9 times a year just to make sure that when that bell rings, they know what to do. This new school will be no exception to that.
Ms. Fisher?
Obviously, we have to have enough ways for the students to exit the school in an emergency, but we also have to be alert about safety issues. Is there anything special we can do to the egress doors that will also assure that people aren't going to come in that we don't want? Will they each, for instance, have a camera on them or some sort of technology?
I mean, that's something that we'll certainly review with the design or take into consideration while we're designing this. Line of sight inside the building is just as important as outside of the building. Looking at a building that does not create any interior or minimizes interior corners that would not be visually accessible from the nearby street. So anybody patrolling the area would be able to see in there. As far as camera locations, that's something that is developed with the design as we go from schematics into DDs, and but certainly we'll take a look at how we can design the building so we don't have to have.
Just to avoid the acronyms, DDs is design documents, design development. Sorry, I know that's something we need to define. But Mr. Ganley's also a big part of this process. He'll review from the schematic point on, and we'll solicit his comments and interpretations and suggestions. Along with, I also serve on the security committee, facility planners group. We don't really have a formal title, but we do meet every couple of months and review some of the latest ideas and things that we're seeing in some of the school systems across Maryland, along with we're supposed to have some speakers. So we're certainly going to take every ounce of information we can have, but a lot of it, just as Mr. House mentioned, comes down to thoughtful design.
Because they mentioned line of sight, which is obviously good, but there's not always somebody standing there constantly watching. That's why I thought cameras or some sort of technology that would alert somebody if a door was opened or left propped, as students sometimes do.
Yes, ma'am. There's various practices and designs that we'll utilize to make certain that we give the best security we can possibly give.
Thank you.
Other questions? Mrs. Williams?
Yes, I had a question about classroom space as it compares to, you mentioned Morgansville being used as an example for parents and community members. I read somewhere in this document that it's 870 square feet. How does that compare to, say, Rockland or Ruth Ann Monroe or Morgansville? Comparable?
It's comparable. I think one of the things you have to add into is, if you'll notice in the specifications, it'll give a 50 square foot restroom. In this portion of the design, the committee felt as though the restrooms were important to include in those classroom space. So the net total of the classroom space is actually 920 square feet. You have the 870 classroom space plus the 50 square foot individual restroom facility in there. Aaron, help me out with Morgansville. I believe it's right around the same number. The kindergarten rooms I know were just right around 1,000 square feet, as well as the pre-kindergarten rooms. In this particular facility, of course, the committee determined that the 920 square foot room would be sufficient for kindergarten, but if you'll notice, we left the pre-kindergarten rooms at 1,000 square feet because they felt it was important to have that extra room for the educational service that they were going to deliver. So getting back to your question, it's very comparable to the newer facilities that we built. It could be just a hair over or a hair under, but it's right in the ballpark. Yes, ma'am.
If memory serves me correctly, the grade 1 through grade 5 classrooms at Morgansville were 850, and that did not include the restrooms in that.
Which would have been 50 square feet, bringing them to 900, so it's plus or minus 20.
So all classrooms will have an interior restroom, is that what you're saying? And they're
I'm not going to say all classrooms, because obviously there's some itinerant rooms and some other specialty spaces.
grade level classrooms?
But yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Much to the chagrin of the superintendent, by the way.
But the superintendent also wanted that when we discussed the potential of the future phases, we were going to look at any of the future phases. You'll notice they do not have restrooms in the older facilities. So that was a consideration that the committee looked at and incorporated.
I lost.
You lost that.
I don't think it's a good use of our space, but then I lost.
Ms. Brighton?
Mr. Criswell, I appreciate that the committee, the EdSpec committee, toured Morgansville. What other schools maybe outside of the system or in another area? Was there any opportunity for that committee to maybe see something a little bit different?
Actually, because of the time frame, we felt it was important, and based on the committee members and the community members being from the impacted areas of Conococheague, Winter Street, and Salem Avenue, for convenience, we held 3 of the meetings at those facilities. And we did look at Salem Avenue. We walked around that a little bit, and we kind of toured some of the areas of Conococheague and Winter Street, but unfortunately, we did not go and tour any other facilities. I'm afraid we did not go anywhere else.
I just know that other counties going forward are struggling, in other states are struggling with how to align facilities with the new curriculum, the new technology, and the new instructional methods that may be coming forward, and we don't always know exactly what that's going to look like. We just know it's going to be different to some degree. And I guess my question is, if we're showing the committee schools that we built, wonderful schools, but were built before we started asking some of these questions, are we not limiting the opportunity to look beyond that to something maybe different? So that's where I'm going there, and I'll turn to the group here. Is I know you're not educators, but I know you design schools, and I know the industry talk and share information and trends and so forth. So I guess based on what I said, but add to it the concept that how flexible are these ed specs? So as you move toward the design, could we be expansive? Could we dig deeper? Could we think broader about what a facility looks like going forward in the future?
Certainly. The ed specs are, as Chad and I have talked before, are kind of the recipe or the cookbook. Gives you all the ingredients. You know, we mix it into a bowl, put them down on paper with our concepts, and start to develop that, and then we end up with a school. And when we design a school, we look at all the various components of it. And we have a lot of things here in the ed spec that are things that we will consider or take a look at, and one of those things is technology, and the other thing that we have in here is about flexibility and adaptability. And so in a lot of the research that we've done on the 21st century school design, it talks about classroom spaces and how being able to set them up in different orientations throughout the course of the day or the week, having the flexibility in the classroom to, you know, if for one lesson, we want to arrange the furniture so we're looking towards the north wall, and in the afternoon, maybe we shift everything around that we look towards the west wall as the teaching wall. But then also being able to use these classrooms in various ways to have either like smaller group studies or breakout spaces in there for various types of collaboration inside of the classroom. And in our recommendations, we have these, if we can find the efficiency and find the square footage without taking anything out of the classrooms, to provide these collaboration spaces either between classrooms or out in the corridor, something like that, to give them that flexibility kind of in the classroom and maybe outside of the classroom also. I don't know if that answers your question.
Sort of, kind of.
Okay.
But what I will do is, and this is just one board member, is I will probably forward you some reading material and some photographs, just so you can see what this one board member is seeing when I think of maybe a potential for future space, learning space, and what it might look like functionally.
Mm-hmm.
And the energy that I think can be generated with an interesting design. So I'll take that liberty. Thank you.
Other questions or comments?
I just have one additional.
All yours.
I'm looking at page 13 where it speaks to the code requirements for electrical outlets are considered the minimum, and then it goes on to say that the engineer is encouraged to resolve the need for additional outlets through innovative design. So I'm hoping that we're not going to let it just to the engineer, that we're going to have staff input so that we have all the outlets that we need to support the technology and the great things that classroom teachers will have at their disposal.
Yes.
Okay.
Throughout the design process, we have, every 2 weeks, we have a design review meeting with the
Staff input?
Staff, members of administration, it goes right down the gamut, and it goes through several reviews, including maintenance. And this is obviously way ahead of where we're at today.
Right.
I mean, we've got to get some sketches first, but yeah, we definitely take great pride in making sure we go through and look at every component of the building, so it is considered, and we do give that thought. But it will never fail. We'll always get one room where we could have done it a little better. Or, we heard that at Mulligansville, but we did take notes, and we're going to forward those on.
Good, good. Thank you.
Any other? Mrs. Fisher?
I've got a question about timeline. On pages 2 and 3 of this draft, and we're expected to have the school ready for the students in the fall of 2016, but if you look at the little chart on page 3, construction administration is through August of 2016, and then there's 2 months beyond that for post-construction.
Yes, ma'am. The post-construction right now, that includes change orders, things after final completion. Of course, whenever you open a school and you do get the use of occupancy, there's things that occur, say like grass being planted in the field, or there's things that will have the contractor come back and touch up a little bit of paint. We call them punch lists in the construction industry. And then there could be some other things that we have to go through and do, contractually to make certain that the project is closed out in accordance with the guidelines from the Maryland State Department of Education.
It just seems to me, though, that the construction administration should end at the beginning of August, not the end of August, since we usually start school about the middle of August.
To be quite honest, our goal would be to have construction end in May, like we currently are trying to do with our more recent facilities. But when we put this document together, again, we had to kind of go with some general timeframes, knowing that the schedule could be flexible depending on where we ended up. So once we get to that point in the design, we will probably amend that before we go out for our actual construction bid to contractors.
Good.
But that is an excellent catch. Yes, ma'am. We've already had some discussions about that.
Thank you.
Is there any other discussion? Amanda?
Going forward with the park assessments, we're going to need a lot of technology and a lot of computers. So I'm wondering if you're looking, I know traditionally it's been like the computer lab, kids go to the computer lab. Are you looking at laptop carts or iPad carts more? How are you looking at addressing the need for that much technology?
Yes. Laptop cards, laptops, iPads, portable devices.
everything.
The
you can get your
computer
hands
lab
on.
is probably a thing of the past in this district, a lot, in new construction in particular. There are some testing environments that it just works well for kids to bring 25 kids into a classroom, but the other application is that in the real world, adults don't go to computer labs to work. They have their computers with them, and that's really what we want to teach.
Okay, thank you.
And I think also ensuring that we have the infrastructure for adequate wireless capability, having the bandwidth for all of that. So that's very important.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? If there are none, the questions on the motion to approve the educational specifications for West City Elementary made by Mr. Bailey. All those in favor? Are there any opposed? The motion passes 7-0. The student member concurs.
I would just
Thank you,
like to
Mr.
point out, I've voted with Dr. Wilcox on the restroom, so and I lost one. Just going to throw that out there so it's
Who
a
voted
record.
the other way? That's what I want.
We can make sure that's in the minutes.
Thank you, Mr. House. Thank you.
Also, just
Mr.
one quick,
White.
a
Sure,
little bit of
absolutely.
privilege. I just want to say what a pleasure it's been to work with BFM on this project. You guys have been great. It's really been good to spend some time getting to know your firm better, but also what you bring, the expertise. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Both of you.
Thank
We look forward to working with you down the road.
Thank you.
Next on the agenda is the superintendent's report.
Yes, and we're going to have come forward, the whole crew. We're going to continue our theme of talking about what the park assessments might look like going forward. And tonight we're going to have a presentation that really focuses on math. They understand it's been a long day for you, so they're going to be direct and to the point. They're going to move you through this process. But please, don't lose sight of the opportunity to ask them some questions. I'm going to let Steve introduce the team that he has with him at the table today. We have absolutely a terrific team in front of you today.
Wonderful, thank you. Actually talking about the park assessments and the use of technology, we'll be embedding that in the presentation today. So good evening, President Hardings, Dr. Wilcox, and members
Kevin.
of the board. I'd like to introduce Kara Reed, Supervisor of Mathematics. Kevin Sandell is a grade 4 teacher at Bester Elementary School. Kara and Kevin will provide you with an overview of what a grade 4 student will be expected to do to complete a math assessment prototype on the PARC, or the Partnership for Assessment of Reading for College and Career Assessments. I think you will concur that the PARC prototypes are a more complex and multi-step problem compared to our current MSA or Maryland School assessment questions that students currently take in March. I'll now turn it over to Kara and to Kevin to support the presentation.
Good evening, President Hardings, Dr. Wilcox, and members of the board. As you know, the Common Core State Standards for Mathematics were designed to be more focused, coherent, and rigorous than current math curricula in the United States. That being the fact, clearly the way that we assess students and their mastery of the content needs to change. And Kevin is going to share with you a grade 4 MSA item and then a grade 4 PARC prototype item. Mr. Sandell has been a member of a team working for the state, writing Common Core lesson plans aligned with mathematics, and he also has experience implementing the state curriculum and MSA items, as well as that transition to the Common Core and using PARC prototype items in his classroom.
Good evening, President Hardings, Dr. Wilcox, and members of the board. Behind you, or in front of you, actually behind me, is an example of an MSA question for 4th grade. So I'll give you a few seconds just to take a look at this question.
Can you see it?
As you can see, this question asks the students to find the area of the desk, and they are given the length and the width. And they will have to then apply the algorithm, length times the width, to find the area of the desk. And then at the bottom of that, they would have to use numbers and words to explain exactly how they found the area of their desk. In the grade 4 standard for the Maryland State curriculum is that they need to apply and determine the perimeter and the area. So that's an example of an MSA question for grade 4. Our next one is completely different. This is an example of a PARC question, which is assessing area as well. So I'll give you a few seconds to take a look at that. As you can see, this is completely different than the first one we just saw. In this question, the students will not only have to find the perimeter of the entire park here, but then they will also have to find the area, and then they'll have to take that number and find the estimated amount of deer that will be in this area. So this is a 3-step problem, which is quite complex and much more rigorous than the first MSA question here. This skill is also built on from 3rd grade as well. So there's a sharp contrast between this MSA question and this park prototype question.
Right. So as Kevin said, for the MSA items, students simply needed to know the algorithm or the formula and to insert the numbers and then explain their response. And for the park prototype, it's much deeper. They have to understand what the question's asking, take and find the missing information that they need to then make the computation, and then decide how many deer might there be, which is an arguable fact. Well, not really a fact, an arguable response, because a student might argue that deer can't inhabit where there's water and rocks, so they could factor that out mathematically, and this could have several responses depending on whether or not the students are able to justify. So obviously this also requires a different type of classroom than what we're accustomed to in a traditional maths teacher-directed. We need to shift to student-centered. So Kevin's going to talk a little bit about things that he's done in his classroom to make that shift.
So for the last several months, we've made this shift at Bester. We're currently doing a unit on baseball, and we are incorporating, we're reading about biographies about famous baseball players, identifying character traits, tying them into a writing piece, and then we're also studying aspects of the game of baseball and looking at stadium sizes and just applying math into planning a trip to see a baseball game. So one of the shifts for teachers is that they need to be flexible. This is a different shift in teaching for teachers, so that's definitely one of the big things. Another thing, as Ms. Reed had pointed out, is it's a lot less teacher-directed instruction. If you were to walk into my classroom, the students would be in flexible groups, working with other students. I would be assisting students that need some help. I would be going out coaching and modeling how to solve these complex problems and giving them the chance to solve them by themselves. Technology is another big piece for these kinds of questions. We encourage the use of technology, and we also encourage them how to use technology appropriately. So if I'm not available, our students have websites and resources on the internet they can use to find the answers themselves and make that as real world as possible. Another thing is these are real world problems, like Ms. Reed had said. Our kids are getting into this unit because they want to go to a game. They notice that the Suns were playing tonight, and we're kind of starting to think what they would need to do to plan these trips. One of the biggest things that I've had to coach my kids about is risk-taking. These kinds of questions, for the kid to be successful, they need to take risks because there's not always one answer. And they need to go out there and really try something new, which is something that we've really been instilling in our students in 4th grade. And mistakes are part of the road to success. And our kids are really seeing that making a mistake is just one step closer for them to that end goal. And that's what we want them to see, because as adults, we all know that we make mistakes and we learn from them. My advice, if I was talking to brand new teachers about this, would be definitely teaching students how to look at these problems differently. It's a new style of thinking for these students. If a new student were to walk into my classroom, they would see their friends being teachers as well, which gives our students a lot of excitement, and they're really taking ownership of their learning. So if I'm not available, a student is coaching another student, which is fantastic. They're realizing how important these real-world skills are and applying these math concepts. And lastly, my students do know that mistakes are possible and that they are a great opportunity for them to learn and become successful mathematicians and human beings.
So the shift to a student-centered classroom has been our focus in mathematics from pre-K to 12, and will continue to be our focus as we continue to implement the Common Core state standards. What questions do you have for us?
Ms. Fisher.
I've heard a lot of dire predictions about the results of the first take of the park, how many failures there's going to be. If this deer in the park problem were given to your 4th graders today, what percentage of your class do you think would pass it?
It's funny that you asked that. I gave them, we've been doing some park questions in my classroom, and I brought some samples, and initially it was very tough for our students. It took a lot of modeling, a lot of work, a lot of mistakes we made along the way. With that said, with about 2 months of that under our belt, a lot of our students are seeing a shift in their thinking. An example, today we started, and my question I asked them was, why do I pose these difficult questions to you? And one of my students said, well, it's so that we can understand that there are lots of different mistakes we could make and challenges along the way for some of these problems. However, the student had a challenging day today and kind of struggled and kind of almost gave up on the problem. I sent him back and said, look what we talked about earlier. He came back after he settled down, and he completely finished the problem with a little extra motivation. So I think with this shift, it is going to take time, but I think that the more we encourage our students to be risk takers, and we're encouraging this kind of teaching and learning from our students, I think we will see decent results in the future.
Mrs. Burton?
You've sort of taken my breath away. I'm not sure I've heard a teacher really embrace risk-taking. I can't tell you what that means to me as an adult to think that we're actually heading in that direction. Here's my concern with that is teachers are being evaluated on the outcome of these tests. How many teachers are really going to encourage children to take those risks if the outcome of the test impacts their livelihood? I mean, I love it. I'm just wondering in the real world how we make teachers willing to take a risk along with the students willing to take a risk.
Well, here's the ultimate irony. Those who don't encourage kids to take risk will be less successful with their students in these measurements, because these measurements will actually encourage that kind of thinking. You won't get to the answer unless you take these risks. So that's the message that we're trying to share with our teachers. That's why we've adopted the assessment system that we have for teachers. That's a coaching model. It's not a I gotcha model. Now, I understand we have a lot of work to do to kind of get everyone to believe that, but it's also, we're also dealing with a state bureaucracy that's trying to say that student scores, constitute 50% of a teacher's evaluation. We have work to do. But I want to share something else, and then we can come back to this broader discussion. And that is this. Kevin is an outstanding young teacher, and he's someone who understands that we can't confuse a bunch of really fun activities for real instruction. What Kevin has to do prior to teaching is understand deeply what the standards are and what the discrete learning objectives are for the young person, and then he has to organize activities that will lead kids to that mastery. Kevin knows, as I think most great teachers know, is that a young person can't do this without a fundamental understanding of mathematical operations, addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. So those skills have to be taught. And then they can design lessons that help those kids to apply them in these real-world situations. So, the work that we have right now is helping our teachers to sequence learning in a meaningful way that leads to larger outcomes, that allows the kids to do this kind of work. I would share, I think, one more comment here. As a school system, we have said that we anticipate a score dip. We absolutely do. It's not something that we can really afford in our standings relative to our peers, but we think that it's more important for our teachers to get this right over time for our kids' success. If we embrace a coaching model, if we don't make a big deal out of the ranking that a teacher gets at the end of the day, because what's really important to us is not the ranking of the teacher, but the learning that the students experience. And so, teachers turning in will hear me saying this. I say it every month to the principals. Kara can tell you, Steve can tell you, it is the mantra of our top leadership team at the district that we want our teachers to be successful. We know it's going to take time. That's the purpose of having, last month, our reading specialists here, this month, our math specialists. We're going to keep cycling through. We're going to move up because we want people to see this is very different. And we want to have the chance to say over and over again, we want to be successful. We are not going to be punitive in this process, but we do expect everybody to kind of put their nose to the grindstone and let's get the work done. You know, there's no excuse for it. It's just that we're going to be thoughtful about it.
That's absolutely. And if I could just add one more thing. You know, certainly you talked, how do we get our students to be risk takers? Well, as teachers, we have to persevere and be risk takers. And
You
as
have to
leaders,
model it.
we have to persevere and be risk takers. So it comes, you know, Dr. Wilcox is a perseverant risk taker. So he models that, we take that, it goes to the teachers and goes to the students. There's no other way that it's going to happen, that students will be successful if they don't see it modeled all the way.
It's the real world.
That's
It
right.
is what it is. Just one follow-up, and thank you. I assume there's partial credit for partial answers. What?
There is an answer
I just
structure.
I went
um,
through the part.
The website.
Website.
There's a structure for each item as far as
And
how it would be
everything's
scored.
weighted a little bit differently.
Correct.
I
So they
assume.
look at, did the student get a reasonable answer? Was their response, and each type, there are 3 different types of tasks for mathematics for the PARCC assessment. So each type of task is looking for different elements, and they receive a score based upon their success.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions or comments? Ms. Harshman?
When I was teaching, I had a sign in my room that you might want to share with the kids, which said, Babe Ruth struck out 1,300 something times. And they always noticed it. And so I made them, or tried to make them, risk takers, as I often felt I was. So I think that's excellent that you're doing it.
That will probably be in Kevin's classroom tomorrow.
You may even ask them to look it up on the internet.
Yeah, check the exact number, but it's 1,300 something.
Ms. Crable?
I have a couple questions. So for a new question, or for a new PARCC question versus the old MSA questions, would they have the same amount of time? Because obviously that's a much different question. So are the students expected, you know, if we're supposed to take 3 minutes on the first question, are they still taking 3 minutes, or is it broken out differently?
Sure. Well, we have the timelines for the PARCC assessment. So, for example, for math, in grades 3 through 5, there are 2 sections, and each section is either 50 or 55 minutes long. But as far as how many items are within that section, we don't have that information yet.
Okay.
As I just shared, there's 3 different types of items. So we're used to 2 different types of items with MSA, of BCRs and ECRs. And so there'll be different types of items in each one. We'll work with students on how to budget your time wisely.
Okay.
And the answer to the question is Babe Ruth had 1,856 career strikeouts, but what's
800.
1,856. But what's also interesting is that Babe Ruth had strikeouts on 2 sides of the ledger because for the first 5 years of his career, he was a pitcher. And so he had strikeouts both throwing it and hitting it. It's important to note that Babe Ruth had 488 strikeouts in the regular season, and he had 8 strikeouts in the World Series. Kids today can do the same thing I just did, but faster.
Thank you, Dr. Wilcox.
Thought you'd want to know about Babe Ruth's record.
It's true. A student did that to me this morning when I was in their classroom. And I asked, I think they were 5th graders, how far the moon is from the Earth, because we were talking about exponents. And so I did a higher or lower. Is it more than 100, more than 1,000? I think I got to 10,000, and the little girl said, it's 238,000 miles. And she had her iPad, which was great fun. I just have one quick question. Is there any research that indicates whether all of the verbal and language skills that are part now of our math assessments, whether any of a deficit that a child might have, or just not a deficit, just they're not as good at language, whether that might mask some of their math abilities as it's assessed on a test? Because there must be kids who can do that type of math, but when they have to sit down and try to explain it, they can't explain it as well as we might like them to. Is there any research that shows any of that?
Well, you're right. I mean, some students can mathematically reason, because that's what it's all about. Can I reason mathematically? But then how do I communicate that with my peers and with my teacher to ensure that they understand how I reasoned? And we have that happen often in mathematics, where a student might get an answer, even now with Common Core, they might get an answer that's incorrect. But if they could actually explain to me how they got that answer, their thinking might be spot on and just require one little tweak. But you're right, there are some students who have that language deficiency. Mr. Warnick, did you want to add something?
I think that with the Common Core and the communication skills of speaking and listening are so important to embed in all subject areas, as well as the writing piece. And I think you are correct that if a child isn't able to write or think, and able to speak correctly, that it will hinder them in explaining their answers or justifying their answers. So I think within any subject, it's important that we're making students speak, publicly or in a group, write, and as well as listen to each other so that they can support each other with justifying answers.
On the reverse side of that, too, if the kids can't read, they can't set the problem up appropriately. So that's another issue. And I think Kara probably sometimes has looked at me and said, Clayton, will you let up on the literacy issue so we can talk about math? But, I really think that literacy is a foundational skill that opens the door to math in many ways. So
I don't ever think that, Dr. Wilcox. They go together.
Somehow, I'm not sure. But
I have a question. With regard to these multi-step problems in terms of assessing and doing an item analysis to be able to know exactly what it is the child knows and what area needs to be retaught. And I can just see that takes quite a bit of time on the part of the classroom teacher to be able to look at each individual child's work and to be able to sort through that and make those decisions for instruction and grouping students. And can you speak to how you manage that in your fourth grade classroom?
So this is definitely new for me, so I'm still learning and reflecting about this. But I think to answer your question, what I've found successful right now is when I meet with students, I have a list of the skills that they need to have mastered, either from that page or skills prior that they need to have mastered. So when I'm meeting with a group of students, it's typically about a skill that we're assessing on that day. And so when I'm meeting, I have a group of maybe 3 or 4 students that need help with that skill. And we're working through that. And maybe it takes 5 minutes, maybe it takes 15, maybe it takes a lot longer. Once I feel they would have mastery or I can move to a next group, I might pull another group of students with similar skills that need help. So it's a lot of small group instruction, and it does take time. You are completely right. Grading these and figuring out those individual points that they need is time consuming, but it gives me very real world data, which is very applicable to myself. The students know exactly where they need to be as well, so they know which concepts and skills that they've mastered or still need help with. What we've been doing recently is at the beginning, they have an I can list of things that they can do. And so when they feel like they've mastered that concept, they can check it off, and then they get approval or explain to me if they've mastered it or not. So it is time consuming, but I think it's very real world data that the teacher can definitely use and the student can use as well.
And Mrs. Williams, our teachers have resources available to them so that they can see the skills in a domain that a student should have mastered to be successful. So that helps teachers to go and backward map and try to figure out where a student might have a deficit in their understanding.
May I have one follow-up question? I'm wondering if you have a bank of items and if you're working at the school level or at the county level to develop, because in addition to trying to assess these and plan for instruction, I'm thinking that to create a problem like this takes some time and thought and creativity.
Sure. Well, one of the great things about Common Core is it is common. So and I don't mean that as in simple, but in that all of the states who have adopted the Common Core are all working on it. So it's a fantastic opportunity for collaboration across state lines and within state lines. So I serve on a team of supervisors who meet together to talk and look at resources that are out there. Park just released, I think it was about 2 weeks ago, the item development documents. So prior to that, it would have been much more difficult for us to look at developing our own items. So that kind of helps us as a roadmap to doing that. But we look to not doing that in silos and to working as collaborative groups within our system and across the state and across the states that have developed it, and also looking at resources that are out there. It's a very complex process. I don't think the people who developed the Deer in the Park problem sat down and did it in, an hour, because you really have to think about what students need to know and how they'll demonstrate that mastery.
Exciting time.
It is.
And from our point of view, fourth grade at Bester, the enrichment teacher and I have been creating these common assessments for our students. And you're right, it has taken a lot of time because there's many steps that we need to incorporate, but that are focused on the skills we need to teach. So it does take a while. But in the end, these are great. I think they're great pieces, and we're already starting to reflect for next year as to how we can make them even better. I actually brought some samples. If you'd like, we can leave them for you as well.
So it's a very thoughtful process for the teachers as well as the students. As you're great.
Ms. Grove?
I have to say, I really like this and how it's making the students think for themselves, and it really reminds me of what happens in AP and especially IB classes, where you aren't just taught, you're taught how to think. And I cannot tell you how many times my calculus teacher, Mr. Warrenfeldt, he's a coach too, has told me that he used to think he coached baseball and taught calc. He was completely wrong. He coaches calc and taught baseball. So I really like how you're teaching it and how you're teaching the kids to think. I'd love to visit your classroom, by the way.
Are there any other comments or questions? Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
for giving us a lot to think about. Next on the agenda is personnel action. Ms. Francisco. Oh, I'm sorry. We've got one more more superintendent's report.
May we do
item.
one more thing?
I'm sorry.
We have been blessed with, I think, some terrific young board student members. And while we know that Amanda has a couple of dates left with us, we wanted to take today while school was still in session and people might actually get to see the replay while they were still in town, to say thank you, Amanda, for your service, to tell you how proud each of us are of the way you've handled your boardsmanship, to watch you sitting down there today, having been really the sole driver behind the change in our student dress code, really gave me a great deal of pride. And so the board members and I would like to present something, and I know some of the other board members may want to say something to you as well. But what we would like to do is present this plaque to you, Amanda, that says, in recognition of your outstanding service as a student member of the Washington County School Board from July 2012 to June 2013, on behalf of the Washington Board of Education, we want to give you this plaque and say thank you very much.
Thank you.
Any comments or remarks? Ms. Sargent?
I just want to say it's been a pleasure to sit next to you, even though I didn't always agree with no pajamas to school, but I can live with it, just to have someone like you, and I certainly expect the person who takes your place to be nearly as good as you've been.
Oh, thank you.
Anybody else?
I just would like to thank Amanda for her leadership skills here, her people skills, and I know your leadership with student government and at school, and wish you the best. And you probably don't need the wishes because you're going to do great things. Thank you.
And the board members have more time to say things to you, because you have 2 meetings left, but we just did not want you to get away from us without.
I'm saving my comments for her graduation.
That's short and sweet.
It's a long speech, I hear.
25 minutes worth. Yeah, 25 minutes speech. Well, thank you very much.
All right,
Now we've got personnel.
Now we do.
action.
I'm
I'm sorry I skipped ahead. See, if it's not on the list, it just goes out of my head. So.
Dr. Hardings, Dr. Wilcox, members of the board. As we discussed in closed session this afternoon, there are several staff changes for your consideration.
Is there a motion to approve the staff changes recommended by staff?
So moved, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Ridenhour. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Bailey. Is there any discussion? If not, the question's on the approval of the staff changes. All those in favor? Are there any opposed? The motion carries 7-0 and the student abstains. Is that correct? Okay. Great. Thank you, Ms. Francisco. Reports to the board, board member committee reports. Mrs. Harshman, curriculum and instruction.
Curriculum and instruction has not met since our last board meeting, but we will be meeting next Tuesday, May 28th at 12:45. The agenda will be posted online.
Thank you, Mrs. Harshman. Mr. Bailey, finance.
Finance has not met. We'll meet next in the month of June.
Thank you, Mr. Bailey. Mrs. Fisher,
Policy Committee has not met since our last business meeting either. However, we will be meeting on May 28th. But I'd also like to report that the Charter Policy and Application Review Committee has now met 5 times, I believe it is, and is scheduled to meet again on May 30th. What we're doing basically is rewriting, and it's been a major undertaking, our policy and application, which this time is roughly 70 pages long, but the new state policy and application is over 200 pages. And in addition to that, we have also been looking at what some of the other counties have been doing in revising their policies and trying to merge the best of all of these into our new policy. It'll hopefully in another month about come to the policy committee, and then from the policy committee it'll come to the full board.
Great, thank you, Mrs. Fisher. Mrs. Brightman, facilities.
Facilities will meet May 28th at Frederick Street location at 9:45, open to the public. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Ridenhour, Human Resources.
HR has not met since our last meeting. We will be meeting in June.
Thank you. Mrs. Brightman, anything from MABE's Board of Directors or Legislative Committee?
Just working again on the strategic plan and new bylaws, and we'll be moving forward in policy and procedure, and then we'll discuss the other under miscellaneous.
Great.
Thank you.
And Mrs. Harshman, Mrs. Williams, anything on the agenda plan, on the conference planning committee?
Nothing new.
Okay, great. Next on the agenda is miscellaneous business, a discussion of board member representation at the May Budget Planning Committee meeting on June 24th. I forwarded to all of my colleagues a letter from the president of MABE, Jensen, what's his first name?
Roger.
Roger Jensen, requesting, it was a letter that went out to all the presidents of the boards, asking that all the boards be represented at that June 24th meeting. Hopefully you've all had a chance to read that. So the question is anybody available or interested, ideally, in representing Washington County at that meeting on June 24th? Meeting's at 10 a.m., as I believe.
I would just say there's probably just going to be this one meeting. If everything isn't resolved, there may be a second, so your commitment would just, hopefully, just be for June 24th at 10. It is fairly important that each district be represented there because we're changing the fee structure, the budget, a lot of the budget process, the accountability, who has authority over the budget, significant changes for MABE. So it would be great to have a voice at that table.
Anybody?
On vacation.
Oh, come on. All right. Mr. Bailey's on vacation. I'm actually not out of town that week, so I can, at least not yet, so I can represent us if, I guess if need be. I'm happy to do it.
And I'll be a safety net. I just attend several of these at different levels,
Sure.
and I think it would be nice to have some checks and balances and another set of eyes and perspective.
And there's nothing that says only one of us can go either, right?
You can have an alternate, but it can only be one vote
One
from each
vote.
district.
Okay. Well, if anybody else has any thought or any interest in it, please let me know, because nothing is locked in.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Future agenda items, I don't have the list in front of me, I'm afraid. I know there's another park discussion.
There is a park discussion coming up. It will be on, I believe, middle school reading. The other thing that we have scheduled or are looking to schedule in either June or at our July meeting is a conversation around special education. We want to talk there about birth to 5.
Right, we talked in agenda planning about having a work session on special ed, especially as it relates to birth to 5.
Yes. And also a review of the summit program.
Okay. Board member comments? Mr. Ridenauer?
Nothing at this time.
Mrs. Brighton?
Nothing to share this evening, thank you.
Mrs. Fisher?
Board members have been trying to sort of divide up the various events that occur throughout all the schools at this time of the year. And one of the ones that I recently attended was the Elementary Citizenship Award ceremony, and it was just a joy to see and congratulate, I guess it was about 75 or 80 students there. They were so polite, so well-mannered, just absolutely young ladies and gentlemen, so it was a delightful evening.
Thank you, Mrs. Fisher. Mr. Bailey?
I have nothing tonight.
Mrs. Williams?
I have nothing to share at this time.
Mrs. Harshman?
I, too, attended Potomac Heights Learning Excellence presentation, and it was just, as Jackie said, just awe-inspiring. It was so enjoyable to be with them. I almost thought that maybe I made a mistake by not going into elementary ed. But I also am hoping that the next time we can get on the agenda the certificates to the students who presented their artwork for consideration and were chosen to be on the note cards for the Maryland Association of Board of Education, that they pass out for each person who comes to visit or to present something for the conference. And there are 4 different cards, which I'm going to see if we can get those shown, and the kids' awards given to them. So that should be the next
I think
time.
we've planned to put it on the agenda.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Ms. Crable, I realized I forgot student government during the board member committee reports. Is there any, are you guys winding down?
Yeah, there's not a whole, I mean, we had our celebration, our banquet. We gave some awards. We celebrated all of us seniors leaving and cried a little bit, but other than that, not really. We're looking forward to next year. We are doing something a little bit different. I may just present this idea to you now. We're talking about, instead of electing a SMOB their junior year, they would be elected their sophomore year, and they would act as a student member intern. That's kind of an idea we're kicking around. So we're going to be working with Dr. Wilcox about how that would affect board policy or regulation or anything like that. But just so that the student members would have a year of experience as an intern before they would actually sit on the board. So we're kicking around that idea. All of the officers will be elected in the fall. Usually we do it in the spring, but a couple things happened this year, so we decided to move it to the fall. But we're very excited for next year.
Great. Any other comments? Okay. I would only add to comments from my colleagues about the events this time of year, and just to add, we've worked very hard as a board to try to make sure that we can get to all the events we're invited to, but there are a lot this time of year. It's an absolute joy to go to them. As I went to the Celebration of Excellence, the Career Technology Awards, just it's really great to see so many kids succeeding. I only wish that each of us had more time so we can get to all of the events that we're invited to. So for all those out there who invite us, please understand that if we don't make it, it's not out of a lack of enthusiasm for what your program is or what your students have done. It's really a matter of us trying to deploy our time as effectively as we can. So if there's no further business from anyone, we'll declare the meeting adjourned. Thank you, everybody.